on Hawaii.
How about it for a guy who was the senior correspondent at ABC News, longtime White House correspondent there as well. He's Jim Avila, everyone. Hi, Jim.
Good morning.
And a guy who has forgotten more about politics than most of us will ever know. You know him from TYT and way beyond, Michael Shure. Hi, Michael.
Hi, Tim, Mark, Jim.
Both of you
Michael.
seem to not take the debt ceiling lift too seriously, although it was closer maybe to the brink, at least in terms of rhetoric, and also in terms of the factions that rule the GOP particularly, than it might have been in the past, but I'd love to get your takes on that. Jim stating emphatically that there was never a risk that we were going to default. I believe, Michael, you were in that same camp. Jim, how would you...
Yeah, let us close just for a minute, will you, Mark?
Yeah.
You guys,
Because all over the media, media, we had this drama and this, it's going to end, and, we're going to have all this terrible stuff, and the right wing is taking us over the cliff. And it happens every time. There's always, the Freedom Caucus was not invented yesterday. And they, they're the main problem. But they're outnumbered, and a majority of Congress, Senate and the House, when you get them out of their factions, don't want this country to fail. And they don't want seniors not to have their paychecks and veterans not to have their paychecks. It was never going to happen. And I think most of the country, myself, I didn't hear the people at the restaurants talking about this. It was only media noise, in my opinion, and inside Washington. The folks out here in California and in the Midwest, it was out here, but they weren't at the edge of their seat, I don't think, because they've seen it before.
Michael, how close to the edge of their seat were they?
Yeah, I don't think they were at the edge. They were firmly back. First of all, most people didn't know what was going on. Let's be serious, right? So we're talking about the people that did know what was going on, and even those people in saner moments. This has played out every single time, right? If you want to bet on something, bet on them raising the debt ceiling every single time. And the one time you lose in 60 years or whatever it is, you'll lose, but you'll have won so much betting that they will fix it and figure it out and raise the debt ceiling that one loss won't matter.
It's never happened.
It's never happened. It just simply doesn't happen. The 14th Amendment and getting upset with the president and Democrats feeling like he gave away.
There's never been anything like this.
But in the back and forth and in the rhetoric within the Beltway, isn't that a public negotiation in a sense? And isn't that, in other words, what you craft out of that is dependent on some level on the back and forth, or is the back and forth also just all kabuki theater?
It's not kabuki. It's politics, right? It's people getting what they want. They're testing the waters at home. They're testing the waters within their small caucuses, and they're seeing if we can raise the debt ceiling. If you're a Republican, we raise the debt ceiling and go back and tell people, well, we got this, this, and this. And if you're a Democrat, well, we didn't get this, but look what we did save, and look what we got them to concede. It's just a rite of passage. It's almost like the Iowa caucuses. You got to do them, and then you move on.
And what was predictable was that they were not going to go after the social programs. Even the victory by the Republicans to require work requirements for some people who get food stamps was really nullified by other things that the Democrats got in that same thing. So there was really no attack on social programs. There was an attack. There was no successful attack on social programs.
That's great.
Unfortunately, go ahead, Michael.
No, I was saying it was space for that rhetoric too.
Yeah. But unfortunately, what was not addressed and continues, Lindsey Graham didn't vote for this package because of defense spending. He wanted even more. And, defense spending needs to be looked at. And that's, look, I want to be safe too, and I support the military, and I'm glad we have all these amazing things that protect us. but the waste and graft that comes from the defense industry has to be addressed. 60 Minutes did another piece just recently, 2 or 3 weeks ago, where they showed that parts that were being sold to NASA for X amount were being sold to the Defense Department for 10 times or 100 times that amount. And that's not an exaggeration. And that has to be addressed, and no one will do it. McCain used to do it, not totally successfully, but he used to at least raise it. And there's nobody there. Lindsey Graham, wants to make himself look like he's strong when he's not. And so he continues to inflate defense spending. And that, if we could get a hold of defense spending, these social programs, including additional social programs that would help people, that would bring them out of poverty, could be passed with the same money.
Yeah, the defense budget is a national shame. I think it's an embarrassment, and it's grotesquely blown up. Here you go. Karen says the defense industry takes half of our GDP, and yet our military families have to go on food stamps. Go figure. Yeah, and this is the other thing that she said. I heard on Hannity that they all were upset that they could not defund the IRS. I never heard that, but hey, it's the IRS. Who wouldn't be for defunding them? Well, the part of the IRS, I thought, and at least this is the way it was characterized, that was being defunded or sapped of funds was the part that was associated with enforcement on the higher earning Americans. Is that kind of the arithmetic that was being done?
I mean, that's what they were looking to do on the Republican side, was to stop the enforcement and stop and reduce the number of audits that were going to the wealthiest in America and a lot of the corporate companies and shell companies particularly, because it takes manpower or human power to do that. And they said, well, if we can cut that, it's too much waste, then we won't have to worry about those people. And you have to also realize with something like this, there are 535 people in Congress, 435 in the House and 100 in the Senate. Getting them to agree perfectly on all of it's never going to happen. And that's why it's a negotiation. That's why it's sitting down and going through these things. And what's interesting about each fight is the sort of the tenor of it and the demeanor of people we haven't seen. We haven't seen Speaker McCarthy in these negotiations before. We haven't seen President Biden in these types of negotiations, though he was in the Senate and such a creature of compromise that we knew a little bit about how he'd operate. So I think that was what was most interesting. And that's what is most interesting about these fights. How it ends up is usually they raise the debt ceiling. Some people get what they want. Some people don't get what they want. And then they go home. As far as defense spending, it's tough because of those 535 people, all of them have the defense industry in their districts and states, and getting them to vote against it means you're voting against jobs, you're voting against retail, you're voting against travel, you're voting against all the things that go in place when we've talked about that in this space before. So it's tricky, it's upsetting. Karen's right, Jim's right, we're all right about that. But getting it done, there has to be another method to it, because the Congress is never going to do it in a big blanket way.
But here's the problem with that, Michael, is that cutting waste, cutting how much a part for the whatever it is, latest plane, cutting the waste on that, the cost on that, shouldn't eliminate jobs.
No,
that's you're doing.
True. Yeah, that's true. And
what you're doing there is cutting waste. You're not cutting programs. And while some of these programs may deserve to be cut, at least start with going after defense contractors who are gouging the American public. And I don't see why, I see why, but the argument that it's going to lose jobs in their district is one they use as an excuse. The real reason is because they're going to lose money from lobbyists and all the money that's coming into their campaigns from these defense contractors. I think that, rather than, along with what you're saying, Michael, along with the danger of cutting jobs, is the real issue.
McCain, so go ahead, Michael, please.
A group of senators, in the late 80s, early 90s, were talking about what Jim is talking about now, which is transparency in bidding, right? The Defense Department would give away these contracts without transparent bidding. And so it was McCain, it was Kennedy, it was Jeff Bingaman, Nancy Kassebaum. It was people on both sides of the aisle at that time that were doing it. It happens in cycles that we talk about this, right? We go social issues, then we go defense, then we go finance, and then we go back to social. And I think why that didn't happen is worth examining, because it is a way of getting at least pressure on a new Senate 20, 30 years later to try and do the same thing. And it did open up some transparency. There's not enough, and those contracts start at a place where they don't need to start. It's just too high, and that would be a way to cut waste, yeah.
And they allowed, the other problem was, and I don't remember which president allowed this, it was either Reagan or Clinton. They allowed these defense companies to merge. So
it was both,
there's only one or two that are out there making these airplanes. So there's no competition, and you can't go elsewhere for Boeing, for Boeing has a monopoly. McDonnell Douglas, they don't exist anymore, do they? They've merged into something else.
Yeah, Northrop.
Northrop, right? Northrop is the other big one, and there's Raytheon, and so there's a handful of these companies, and they have a monopoly, and they're gouging us to death. Just like most corporations right now have, a study after study shows that corporations are taking advantage of all kinds of things, especially COVID and then supply chain issues, as an excuse to gouge the American public and build up incredibly record profits. And now the Republican Party, what they've done, that you just touched on, Mark, is that they want to gut the IRS because they don't want the IRS to go after them and collect the taxes that we deserve. And it's ridiculous. And the only way this is going to change is if people take their votes seriously and vote in their own interests and not in corporations' interests. Okay,
yeah, the merger mania that really typifies unbridled capitalism, I'd suggest, and I'm for a free market and all that. Although we don't have a free market. There are oil subsidies and there are meat subsidies and there are agricultural subsidies. There are all subsidies of all kinds all over the place. So this isn't a free market economy, but there are parts of the economy that are free-ish market. But anyway, that said, this merger mania, of course, leads to what you're talking about, which is price gouging and your inability to shop it. And I think it is being realized. I'm hearing it talked about, some of what Jim is mentioning, more and more when it comes to military contractors. Now, I don't know the solution. As you say, they bought and paid for their government, so I don't know that there'll be any resolution. But you're making such important points, which is that there's really no other way to shop for a better price because of all of these mergers. The last thing I would say on military budgets is, just because we get into this thing, it's percentage of GDP and all the rest, and I'm seeing it in the chat. Well, it's this percentage of GDP. Look, if you look at discretionary spending in the United States of America, the military is the greatest chunk. I mean, it's over 50%, I think 53, 56%, whatever it is. It's insanity. And because it's discretionary spending, it takes a chunk of those programs that Jim was talking about, all the programs that are involved in lifting up those that need a lift. So I think it's scandalous. I want to ask you about, just because we have you guys on, this is the politics of it, and you talked a bit about McCarthy and the characters involved in the negotiation Biden. McCarthy's stronger than a lot of people have been talking about McCarthy being. Certainly the media has sort of talked about him being the weak leader. I mean, he pushed this through. Does that reflect on his strength on some level?
I think so. I mean, I think he's the speaker of the majority party, so you're strong to begin with until you're not. And there was one vote to vacate, which is one of the concessions, and a vote to vacate means to give an up or down vote on the speaker, basically. That was one of the concessions in that long drawn out, I think it was 17 vote marathon to elect him speaker. Maybe I'm off. Maybe it was 11 or 12. But it was. But you did see a speaker negotiating with the White House. He was the face of these negotiations, and he was able to bring along other people from within his caucus. He still has a thin majority. It will probably be thinner because I don't see George Santos remaining in the Congress very long, and that's someone who voted for him for Speaker. And the reason why he is tiptoed around at McCarthy is because he wants Santos's vote there. And so I think that, you saw Marjorie Taylor Greene, who we know is kind of a lightning rod of the right, and who is unpredictable and unbecoming, and a lot of those adjectives we can throw around when we see her. But what she did was supported the Speaker, and what that does do, while it strengthens the Speaker now, it is going to weaken him. You don't just support the Speaker if you're Marjorie Taylor Greene unless you want something from him. If you don't then get that from him, then he is in trouble, because then you have more people who are going against him. It is a long game that I suspect she and her advisors are having her play, so that she can get a little more power down the road.
Yeah, McCarthy's done a decent job at handing out favors. You didn't hear from Jim Jordan during this either. I mean, Jim Jordan has a chairmanship now of a committee that he wanted. Others that you would expect would be very vocal. I mean, Jim Jordan founded the Freedom Caucus, so we would expect those people to have aligned themselves with Lauren Boebert, or however she pronounces her name, and they didn't. And that's because they got favors from Kevin McCarthy, and they're going to stand with him. It only takes one, as Michael was pointing out, it only takes one congressperson to call for a vote of confidence on McCarthy, but they don't have the votes to kick him out at this point, I don't think. And I think, what you're getting at in the bigger point, let me just make a little larger point, is that the real winner in this was Joe Biden. Biden campaigned and said in his inauguration that he was going to compromise. Well, I don't like some of the things he compromised on, and I know you don't, Mark, especially on the environment, but he is fulfilling his promise. He was very smart during the negotiations. He was low key. He made his points in private. He didn't come out and gloat, so he didn't anger and prick the other side into revolting. And he was able to get first of all, he got the debt ceiling removed or improved, and he also got through without all these crazy Republican things that were in the original outline of the Republican agenda. So while I'm not, and I'm sure that either one of you are totally pleased with the final agreement, he won. His agenda won. His philosophy of government won.
That's the big part. That's the big part, is his philosophy of government. Not only that, I think what you're not seeing shows that he won. The economy added the 340,000 jobs. People are talking about, maybe this recession thing is not happening. The president fell flat on his face at the U.S. Air Force graduation after standing there 2 hours shaking hands. That did not dominate a news cycle in the way you would have thought it would have, because the president's victory with the debt ceiling and the president's jobs numbers under his administration in avoiding recession are what people are talking about. You're not going to make everybody happy ever with these debt ceiling negotiations. And a lot of what Biden did was distressing to a lot of the people that supported him. But the point is that you made, it's about his philosophical approach to these kind of negotiations that win and that have attracted him and been his sort of the coin of his realm forever. And I think that's important.
Just because you did mention the accident he had, I think it's important from what I understand, because I'd also initially thought, he just fell because he was, whatever, tired, as you said, 2 hours or whatever the deal is. But apparently he tripped over a sandbag that was on stage, which is the kind of thing that I would do, you would do, anything. The sandbags are color. We had them in production. You have them in other, when they're the same color as the floor. The black sandbags, they're being used to hold up a light. They're being used to hold down something that's going to blow away, which is the case in this instance. And so he tripped over that. And so much is made of that. But sadly, you know, you or I trip over it, it's just like an embarrassing moment. Probably doesn't go viral. I mean, he trips over it and it starts an entire conversation about it's too old and, you know.
And viral it wasn't a thing when Jerry Ford was falling down once in a while, but it made it seem as if he fell every time he got out of bed. And that wasn't the case. It's not the case with Biden. It was a poorly placed sandbag. But, you know, when a person whose physical fitness and mental fitness for the job of president that he's going to seek again comes into play, it's natural that people will look at that and say, whoa, look at, you know, the president fell down. But
interesting is that what's interesting, too, Michael, is that Trump's initial reaction was actually empathetic. And
right.
He said, you know, don't go crazy on this because, you know, is he okay? And that was really kind of surprising. And,
who got a hold of Trump's phone on that? I wonder.
Yeah, well, it was actually, he was live on, I mean, he was asked in person at a press conference down, I think he was in Iowa. And
yeah,
you know what?
Town hall with Sean Kennedy.
Right. But as you say, though, Mark, the underlying issue is still troubling. In this case, the Secret Service should have moved the dang sandbag, or at least guided him around it or something. Instead, you know, he tripped over a prop, which, you know, can happen, as you say, to any of us. But I don't know about you, but when I first saw it, I was like, oh, here we go again. And, you know, it's going to be, the other side's going to go crazy.
And it's an awful visual, not to interrupt, but just quickly to underscore what Michael said. And it's an awful visual that wouldn't have had the contagion that it had in terms of the internet, in terms of all the different social media platforms and memes, et cetera, you know, back in the old days. Now it just is, it's fodder for everything negative. Go ahead, Jim.
And also because the other presidents, I mean, if you compare him, you know, to Barack Obama's vitality, it's difficult to see. You know, even George Bush running, George W. running all the time. Both Bushes running all the time. We have a serious question about whether or not we should reelect an 82-year-old man by the time the election is over, and 86, I believe, when his term is over. You know, I like what Joe Biden's done. I think I think that he has been a restorative president who has brought us back to normal, who has brought us mostly out of that terrible situation we were in, where we woke up every morning and wondered what our president was going to do or say that would annoy us and everybody else and cause us trouble. We don't have that anymore. He said he was going to be a transitional president, and he's done that. I just wish, in my own opinion, he would doff his cap, say, I did it. Now let's move on. I brought you back to normalcy. I'm gonna fade out. And evidently he's not going to do that.
Well, but there are political realities to that, aren't there, Michael? It's not. I mean, I get that. That it makes for a great end of the movie, but the political realities are you may not retain the executive branch if you do that.
But you may not, even if you run him too. I mean, there's still always a question, and there are always a lot of ifs in elections. And Joe Biden's saying that he is still the best person to be the standard bearer for the party, and he's the president. And power is intoxicating, and he feels like he's done a good job. And I think objectively, the president has done a good job. He's done all of what, it's interesting. We were talking about, I brought up Gerald Ford before as another president who fell. These two presidents had similar administrations and similar responsibilities. Ford to kind of take us out of the morass of Watergate, and Biden to hold our hands and walk us out of the hellscape of the Trump administration. And they both did that to an extent. And there were issues about Ford and the pardon, which to this day I think has been debated, and I think people have come around to the betterment of Ford. He got the Courage Medal from the Kennedy Center. It's got a better name than that, but the Profile and Courage Award. So but what I'm saying is that there's an analog here, but Biden could leave and be looked at the way we're talking about him now forever. And the reality is, if he is reelected, he is not going to be looked at this way as gloriously. It's easy to predict that.
We have to wrap up, Michael, but it's not how he's looked at. It's if you play. I mean, it is in part how he's looked at, of course.
Well, but from his standpoint, I'm talking about from his standpoint.
Okay, from his standpoint, yeah. Because I really would love to follow up. We've got to wrap up for today, but I'd love to follow up on this conversation. Clearly, it's going to be one that's quite relevant for the months ahead on Joe Biden and this 80-year-old thing, how it's the third rail, 80. I don't necessarily see it that way, particularly given all elections have alternatives, right? And you had a guy who was, in his early 70s in Trump or whatever, and he hired a bunch of people, appointed a bunch of people who were coal lobbyists and interior secretaries that were so corrupt that they were literally having to resign every few months. I mean, it was Wilbur Ross didn't declare a bunch of stuff. He was sacking the federal government for a bunch of money. I mean, this is outrageous. Jared Kushner and that family. I mean, this is your alternative. Give me the 80-year-old.
Well, but the point you make, Mark, is any Democrat who does not scare the middle is going to beat Donald Trump. Okay, I don't think it is that's a binary choice, that we're going to either elect Joe Biden or we're going to elect Donald Trump. What Biden won, in my opinion, because people came out to vote against Donald Trump, and they're going to do that again. Right. No matter if Joe Biden is the guy, or if Amy Klobuchar is the person, or somebody in that middle lane of the Democratic Party takes over. And there's a lot of them, Sherrod Brown, and I can go through the list. There's a lot of people who are qualified to do that, who are not going to be 86 years old by the end of their term. And that's my point, is that they're going to vote against Trump no matter who is in the Democratic line.
There was a poll this week. I know you have Ultra Blaster. We'll get out of here, but there was a poll this week that was very telling. It's Democrats, right? It's Democrats who are dissatisfied with Biden, that don't want him to run. To a person, all of them said that they would vote for him in a heartbeat against Trump. These were progressives. These were young voters. These were older voters who say enough with Biden. He shouldn't run. It's too old. And they all said they're going to vote for Biden against Trump. And that sort of buttresses what Jim's saying.
Yeah. Well, we'll talk more about it, as I say, but I so appreciate you guys weighing in. And the nation lives with the debt ceiling lifted. Exactly. And your predictions come to pass. How about it? Jim Avila, Michael Shure. See you, gentlemen. Thank you. Hi, it's Mark, and I thought that was great. Hit the notification bell. You'll know whenever there's a new video being dropped, and please subscribe to our channel to help us save the universe.